Worker David Haynes is putting sharper focus on President Obama's strategy for dealing with ISIS and raising new questions about whether it will be enough. Joining us this afternoon to discuss his firsthand experience in that area and talk about the president's plan, we have Utah Representative Stewart. Thank you so much for coming in this afternoon. Appreciate it. Okay, I want to talk about your experiences overseas. You were supposed to go to Iraq. You've been to Turkey, Jordan, but you never made it to Iraq. What happened?
Well, the security just wouldn't allow us to. We anticipated going in there for a few hours. There were some events that happened that day. It would have overwhelmed their security for us to go there, and we just said, look, we'll stand by and come another time.
So where did you actually go then?
Israel, Jordan, Egypt, Morocco, Turkey. I was gone for almost 3 weeks, 2 different trips, but we spent a lot of time there trying to figure out what's going on. Such an important time over there right now, and we felt like they weren't getting, in my opinion, the leadership out of the White House that they needed. So there were several of us who wanted to go and see for ourselves what was happening.
So the purpose of the trip, did you go with other congressmen as well?
There are a couple of congressmen, a couple of senators on one of the trips. We wanted to extend our hand of fellowship, as is so important, to, we met with the president of Egypt, we met with King Abdullah from Jordan, we met with, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu and others, and their defense and foreign ministers, and we wanted to assure them something that honestly they wonder, and that is, in fact, they ask us. Nearly universally they ask us, where is the United States? Can we count on you? When you say you're drawing a red line in the sand, does that mean anything? And can your allies depend on you? And we needed to assure them that there were many of us in Congress, many of us among the American people who do want to honor those commitments and recognize that we had friends and allies there that need our help right now.
I want to talk about, in the past you've called for stronger leadership on the crisis in Iraq. What are your thoughts on this strategy that the president laid out last week during his address? What were your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a step in the right direction. And here's the reality. The president's had a rough couple months. I don't want to pile on that. But we are bearing the fruit of an administration and a policy which the president wanted to diminish U.S. involvement and U.S. presence and influence overseas. And when we do that, we leave the world a much darker and a much more dangerous and a much more chaotic place. And so the president realizes now that, for example, the military commanders wanted us to leave 10,000 to 12,000 troops in Iraq. We should have done that, just like we did in Korea, just like we did in Germany. We didn't do it in Iraq. ISIS would not be there with the presence that they had if we had. There are other examples of where we need to go back and look what we did over the last few years and say, okay, we made some mistakes. What can we do now to fix those mistakes?
So what should the strategy be right now for the U.S.?
We have to contain ISIS. There's just no question about that. And we can. There is good news. We can contain them, but we can't.
How can we contain them?
Well, a number of things. First thing is they are acting not as a terrorist organization, but as a terrorist state. So cut off their funding. As they rise to the presence of a state, that presents military targets that we can go after. That's good. For example, primarily their oil. They're funding themselves more than $1 billion a year in oil revenue, selling it on the black market. We can stop that flow of oil almost entirely, I believe. The second thing is you bring in surrogates who will help us. The Iraqi army would fight with us right now on that. So will the Jordanians. So will the Egyptians. There are other from the UAE and the Gulf states as well. So use those as proxy. I think those 2 things in conjunction with a few others will be meaningfully step forward.
We're running out of time, and there's so much I want to get to, but I do want to talk about the actual threat of ISIS, not just overseas, but what about here in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's kind of what this always comes down to is we as Americans, I think a lot of us like say, look, we can't entangle ourselves everywhere. We can't be the world's policeman, but we have to protect ourselves. And if we allowed ISIS to establish itself as a terrorist state with access to more than $1 billion a year and every intention to destroy the United States, we would have to deal with them eventually. Let's deal with them now while they're weak and allow them to grow into that really just terrible and enormously powerful state that they may become otherwise.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for coming in this afternoon. Appreciate your time. We're glad you made it back safely.
Thank you.